And we are live.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to one of our first breakout sessions today. We're going to talk in this session about how to utilize data in your 2Gen programming. And actually, Deanna, if you can go ahead and advance to the next slide.
Did it not advance?
There it goes. I just wanted to give you a quick overview. We're going to introduce ourselves, talk about the challenges from the organizational standpoint, from the community organization perspective, and then also talk about the solutions that we came up with and kind of the technical background to all of that with some of our experts on the technical side. And then we will have some time at the end for questions and answers. So please feel free to go ahead and drop your questions into the chat as we're going through. And then at the end, Deanna will help us answer some of those for you. Go ahead and advance to the next slide, please, Deanna. So first, I want to tell you, my name is Maggie Gagline. I'm with Edna Martin Christian Center. I've been with Edna Martin for about 5 years. I started out in direct service, working with our youth program. And then pretty quickly from there, I moved into doing grant writing and other development work. And then I was put over our 2Gen programming, which at the time was the Great Families 2020 program. And then from there, I ended up overseeing our data. So I'm able to kind of come at what we're talking today from a variety of positions and experiences at Edna Martin. With that, I'm going to kind of pass the mic along so that the rest of our presenters today can introduce themselves. Allison?
Hi, I'm Allison Luthi. I'm the Executive Director at the Martin Luther King Community Center. MLK Center is at the corner of 40th and Illinois. And we have similar programming to Edna Martin Christian Center. And our 2Gen work looks like a partnership with IPS School 43 and doing some coaching for families. And so our data program is really looking at the ways that the whole family is engaged in different work with our wellness coaches and our literacy program after school. I've been here for 6 years, and we've built this 2Gen program over the past few years. But I think I'm a data geek wannabe. And so, putting together these partnerships with Treadwell and others and talking with community centers about how data can really inform our work.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining today. I am Michael Etter, research analyst with United Way of Central Indiana's Strategic Information Team. So I am actually part of our smaller ETO team that is known as Efforts to Outcomes, and I will speak to more of that later, as will Maggie, Allison, and Scott, who's also here today. So I look forward to just sharing a bit more about the technical aspects of 2Gen data collection and really best practices and challenges that we've noticed with that.
Hi, everyone. I am Scott Lamb. I'm the principal consultant of Treadwell, LLC. We are essentially a consulting organization that specializes in ETO configuration and reporting, as well as a whole host of other things that we do. So anyway, we work with United Way Central Indiana, with several other providers on configuring ETO and the challenges that go along with that. So that's why I'm here.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, everybody. The first part of our presentation is going to center on sort of the situation that Allison and I were in at our respective community centers as we were approaching this dilemma of how to track 2Gen activity comprehensively and in the most painless manner possible for our coaches and staff. And so what we're going to talk about is going to really center on the three things that you see on your screen. First of all, what the needs and challenges were that we faced with our data, what our existing systems look like. And with that piece, that's going to be different for every organization. So what we present today isn't necessarily going to be something that's a cookie cutter that applies to every other organization that's doing 2Gen work. But if we can kind of take you through what we were working with and where we wanted to get with it. We're hopeful that that will help inform your own processes at your organization. And then finally, we want to also talk about what we want to achieve as outcomes, both for external purposes, for reporting, but also for internal purposes, such as improving our programs and kind of monitoring how things are going from a data perspective. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Allison, and she's going to kind of run down these items from the Martin Luther King Community Center perspective, and I'm going to go back to talking a little bit about Edna Martin.
Okay, thanks, Maggie. Sorry, I'm not sure where that feedback is coming from. I don't know if everybody can hear it or if it's just me. Basically, I know some of my coworkers are watching, and so it's their hard work that has really driven this. We developed this program 4 to 5 years ago, and don't have the capacity to have a full-time data person, right? So as important as data is, I think the challenges between having folks who can build relationships with families and help families establish their goals and make progress on those goals is a very different skill set than being able to run reports and understand data and use those to inform them. And we didn't have the capacity right away to really have a program manager. So coaches, it was up to them to both do their data entry and understand what they were doing. And then, you know, we have outside funding sources that really want that data, including United Way. And so my common phrase is, if it's not on paper, it didn't happen. If it's not an ETO, it didn't happen. And really thinking about, you know, what is that, what is the essential information that has to be entered to meet those needs? But data shouldn't be running the project. Families' needs and desires and wants should be running that project. And we just need to capture the data to help tell those stories. So we identified a staff person, Jarita, who's our wellness coach, to really take the lead on making sure that all that data got entered. And then we've worked with a couple different consultants and over the years and ended up with Treadwell to really make sure that that data is accurate and complete and provides a good accounting of what our programs are doing. So I think, you know, just like bookkeeping and audits for our financial situation, ETO and the data reports help us do a good bookkeeping and auditing of the program side of the shop. But we're a small organization. We only have 3 coaches that do that out of 24 employees. And so really, you know, not having someone specifically only looking at data. And I think as other organizations, we have a different database that works with the after school program and youth literacy. We have a different database that's our transportation program. And so really trying to figure out how to merge all of those so that we get a complete story of what 2Gen programming looks like has been part of our challenge that I think in the last year we've really been able to catch up. But again, I think I want to reiterate that we are not just collecting data to produce a report. While that is required in a grant agreement, we really want to make sure that the front end of the work and the outreach and the community engagement matches what we're able to produce on the back end from a data report. Is that what you wanted, Maggie?
Sure. Indiana, I think you can advance probably 2 slides, I think. Would be great. So similar to what Allison was just sharing, there's going to be a lot of overlap, but there are going to be some distinct differences between what her situation looked like and what Edna Martin was dealing with. So Edna Martin serves a community called Brightwood on the near east side of Indianapolis, and it's been around for 80 years this year. You could argue that Edna Martin was 2Gen almost from its very inception, because Mrs. Martin began working with school-aged children after school, helping them with homework and other things, making sure they had dinner and some Bible study and all of that before she sent them home. And within a few years, she also then began working with parents, because she started recognizing one of, I think, the central tenets of 2Gen work, which is that without assisting with family stability, there's just really limits to how much you can support the child with their academic journey and with their progress and success. With that said, we were very much operating with adult and child-focused programs and services as separate entities. And as a result, had become pretty siloed. I think that this is a natural progress or progression, I should say, when you have funding that is very specific to a certain group, then you really sort of structure the program and the reporting and the staff and everything else in a vertical manner with that particular piece of funding or that particular program. This made it tricky then for us to start being very deliberate about serving a family rather than a parent and a child in a separate program. So one of the first things that we identified that we really needed was an efficient data entry system for our staff. This probably doesn't come as a shock to anyone, but I don't think most people get into coaching or case management because they just dearly adore spending a lot of time with data entry. With that said, I'll echo Allison, you know, if it's not an ETO, it didn't happen. If it's not on paper somewhere, anecdotes and stories are a fantastic tool and they're important, but that does not ever really give you an overall sense of what's happening. So we want to make sure that we are giving our coaches an efficient system that doesn't put too much of their time into data entry, but is also comprehensive and is really giving us that good, accurate picture of what our program is doing from a numbers perspective. As I said, we had existing programs already. So we were looking at how do we take, you know, our adult-focused programs and the data that we're tracking there, make sure that we're not messing up that data for funding or for program analysis that is specific just to adults, but at the same time wanting to make sure that that data plays well and integrates well with data that we are capturing for our youth and our early childhood programs. And then we also wanted to make sure that we were going to be flexible for the future. And so rather than having to stop and ask Michael at United Way every single time that we had a change in our metrics that we wanted to track or potentially had additional funding come in where that funder wanted to see something slightly different than others, we didn't want to have to start from the ground up each time with a brand new report and potentially, you know, new data entry practices that we would have to train our staff on. We were really hoping to come up with some sort of comprehensive system that still had a lot of flexibility for adapting to new needs that we might have down the road. And then we were awarded some additional funding that made that a little more of an acute situation than we had initially envisioned. And Scott can probably comment later on the long road that we've been on to get a comprehensive snapshot kind of performance report for our 2-gen programming overall. Can you advance to the next slide, please? So where we were at with our data capturing is probably going to sound familiar to a lot of you, and it certainly echoes a lot of what Allison was saying. We had efforts to outcomes, which is ETO, which is housed at United Way. It was primarily utilized and had been for years for our adult-focused workforce development program, which is called the Center for Working Families, or CWF. So the staff and the managers and everybody internally that was a part of that part of our offerings and our programming were very well-versed already in ETO and really had a good working system. And we're not super excited about the idea of potentially messing that up by blending it in with additional programs. At the same time, Edna Martin was awarded funding for the Great Families 2020 program. And so we were starting, you know, our own kind of pilot on how to work 2-gen deliberately through that program. We also had several of our programs, our youth, our seniors, our early childhood, that were not being recorded at all in ETO at that point. The youth program, like Allison said, has had several different types of software they've been required to use for reporting purposes, for after-school programming and things of that nature. So that staff was already learning, it felt like a new system every couple of years. They were tracking attendance manually on paper attendance sheets. Our seniors program, it was also paper attendance. There might have been an Excel spreadsheet here and there, but it was very much kind of a mixed bag of approaches to capturing data, depending on what department you were in. And then another point that I should mention about that, with the Great Families pilot, we were able to start kind of testing out what things would and wouldn't work for us, right? So when we were having trouble getting out of our silos in the different departments, where we landed with Great Families was, rather than trying to pull CWF staff over to work with Great Families, we just hired some new coaches and trained them specifically for 2Gen work. And we trained them to be coaches that could offer the kind of entire gamut of coaching topics to their family. So instead of a family coming to Edna Martin and having the parent engage with an employment coach, and then engage with a different coach who was a financial coach, we kind of combined all of these together. And so our coaches for the Great Families program were able to do employment coaching, financial coaching. They were able to help a family identify income supports that they might be eligible for, whether that's federal benefits, whether it's some sort of emergency assistance because the family is in a point of real financial hardship and needs some help. So the coaches, that way, it was just one coach for each family. And the family could get to know their coach, and they could kind of establish a great rapport over time, and it becomes kind of a much more deliberate and deeper relationship. With that said, though, all of the data entry, then, the burden falls on that one coach to track this family very comprehensively as they work towards their goals. Another piece of this for us was acknowledging that not every family comes to us with the same type of needs. Not every family has an urgent situation, but some do. And so we wanted to make sure that we were able to tailor our offerings into Gen programming to really meet our families where they're at. So for example, in our school-age youth program, we have families that really are in a pretty wide range of scenarios as far as where they are at with housing stability, with their careers, with employment in general, with their ability to start saving towards something like a down payment for a house or their child's college fund or retirement, asset building some wealth. And what works for one family is not going to necessarily have any relevance for the next one. So we would struggle sometimes to get some of our school-age families and their parents to be really interested in CWF or to feel like they could really commit the time that it would take to work through that coaching process. And so we learned that we wanted to be able to offer all of those vital programs from the Center for Working Families, but we did want the ability to kind of offer them a la carte and really tailor everything specifically to the family and their needs and the goals that they've identified for themselves. And so we had to figure out how to do that without messing up the data that was already coming out of CWF. I think go ahead and advance to the next slide, please. So where we landed with all of this probably doesn't need a whole lot of additional explanation. We were seeking to transition from tracking individuals to tracking families as a unit, and to do that as painlessly as possible for our staff. We were also looking for an outward-facing need, which was the ability to provide really accurate and comprehensive reports for funders. We wanted to be able to make sure that the numbers we were reporting were not duplicated in any way. We were just accounting for each family once, not multiple times. But at the same time, we wanted to be able to look at demographics. We wanted to be able to talk about emergency assistance, how that might tie into the long-term success for a family. We wanted to then, of course, also be able to have a report that would easily pull any grant-specific requirements as far as reporting. And then internally, what was it that we needed to track because we were just interested in learning more about the patterns that would develop in the families that we serve. We wanted to be able to have an accurate snapshot at any time of how the program is running and the progress that we're making, so that we can identify patterns, so that we can make changes in the middle of a program to improve the quality of what we're offering to the families that we serve. And then finally, since I have this grant writing background and I am more comfortable in the language side than I am sometimes in the numbers, it's important to also be able to tell your story with your data, with your numbers. You can give an individual anecdote and you can talk about what's gone on with a particular family. They can share their stories, and all of those are very powerful things and a great way to reflect on what's happening in the program that you're running. But it's even more impactful sometimes to be able to say, this happened with this family. And when we look at our data, we see that this is also happening with 100 other families in the program. So it's kind of a way of taking individual outcomes and really amplifying them and showing the true scope of what your program is impacting. And I think you can go ahead then. I'm going to pass this over to talk about some of the more technical aspects of how we make this all happen. And for that, I think both Allison and I are very grateful for the help from Michael and the rest of his team at United Way, and then also for the opportunity to work with Scott and kind of get all of his attention on our problems from time to time. So I'll pass the mic.
Perfect. Thank you, Maggie. And Allison, I think both of those insights were tremendous and really highlight your organizations, because, I mean, the bottom line is you both do the work as far as you and your team. So Scott and I are here to help provide that data tracking capability, but without the boots on the ground, these services would not be provided. So again, just a bit of background. I'm part of the Efforts to Outcomes team at United Way of Central Indiana. United Way actually offers a data collection service to nonprofit organizations in Central Indiana. This has been offered since 2016 with the Efforts to Outcomes software. Currently, we have 20 participating, or just over 20 participating organizations. I think what's really valuable about Efforts to Outcomes, this software, which is owned by Social Solutions, is actually built specifically for nonprofit organizations to track their clients' metrics and services and really, help them evaluate their data and get to the bottom line. Additionally, ETO also offers capabilities in terms of report writing to aggregate and analyze the clients and metrics that these organizations are providing. So in part of my role, a lot of what I do is strategizing with organizations to kind of brainstorm their data collection build out, look across the organization at different programs, maybe think about what needs to be built out and how can we do that in the best way possible. And then in turn on the back end, as Maggie and Allison spoke to, a huge part of the data collection component is report writing. So myself and the other 3 members of my team help with that effort. And Scott, I'll let you speak to any points as we go along here that you'd like. We're kind of taking this in tandem. So again, if you want to jump in, please feel free to speak up.
Absolutely.
So I think we can move along to the next slide here, Deanna. Thank you. And so really, before we get into best practices and challenges with data collection, specifically related to 2Gen, I think it's important to really start at a big picture level. So when considering any 2Gen data collection, it's critical that any organization really look holistically at all of their programs. So, that may be tempting, I guess I should say, to think of your 2Gen programming or data collection as its own niche and kind of isolate it in its own corner. That's really not what we want to do at all. So it's important to look at your organizations as a whole and rather think, okay, how can we add this 2Gen lens and really collect our data most efficiently with what we're already tracking with our current programs. Additionally, to that point, if a new data collection mechanism or form, I'm going to try to keep this as general as possible, not to go too much in the ETO lens. But if a new data collection mechanism is needed to be built out, really then think about how can that be added the most efficiently so that these that these programs work in tandem. This next point, avoiding program silos and double data entry. Many times when organizations are struggling with 2Gen data collection, or maybe just data collection in general, I think the biggest problem is that programs don't necessarily speak to each other. So, the same clients may be served in different programs, and because of the way they're structured or the data collection is structured, frontline staff or upper level staff don't necessarily know, again, that those same clients are being served in the same programs. So rather, look at your data collection, look at your programs and think, okay, how can we track these clients and see where they're being served across all points through our organization? Additionally, mapping out your outcomes and reporting requirements with activities. Just thinking of all funders or requirements that you are, required to speak to. Consider that before you start building out data collection or going down a certain path. That way you can see, okay, these outcomes for clients, these outcomes for families are required. How can we kind of build these in such a way that they complement each other? And then additionally, and this point comes with a caveat, I guess, as much as possible, try to condense your records and data collection into one source or software if possible. Now, certain funding requirements may implement conditions that you use a specific program or software to track this data. So obviously in that kind of condition, you would be limited, but many organizations, even those that utilize ETO, may track certain data or program aspects in Excel and then try to add that information in, which again just limits the accuracy and real capability to measure on a holistic level the services and metrics you're providing to clients and families.
Yeah. And we do recognize that sometimes that's not possible to have, one central system that's going to house all of your data. So, so sometimes you have to kind of build in integrations, and that's another thing that we do with organizations as well is, connect to data systems where, you can kind of move data from one to another, or, sometimes it's, you can't really integrate it, but you can at least, batch upload those records from one system to another to keep it consistent and to make sure that you get your reporting that you need.
Perfect. Thanks, Scott. I think you can move along to the next slide, Deanna. And so now we're going to get into a bit more of the best practices, I guess, and really what's critical, not only in ETO, but I think really any data collection system. Both Maggie and Allison spoke to this, but whatever software or program you're using, it's really important to track clients at an individual level, but also as part of a family or household grouping. So, thinking longitudinally in terms of outcomes is really the big picture here. So in terms of clients, in some of the work I do, many of the individual metrics that we track might be related to educational outcomes, workforce outcomes. So These could be applicable to both youth or adult clients. For example, measuring degree certifications or training programs that have been applied for or completed. Looking at employment placements, looking at a transition maybe from part-time to full-time work. Additionally, thinking about benefits enrollment. However, taking that to the next level and thinking about the family, so that could be, maybe acquiring an automobile, home ownership, measuring the economic assets of a family over time, and really uh, getting at, are they truly climbing out of poverty? What metrics and outcomes are they achieving? And additionally, so this screenshot here is actually the intake screen within ETO and how you add clients or enroll them into a particular program. So this just demonstrates the capability to track standard client information, whether it be contact information or demographics. And additionally, ETO offers the capability to group individuals as part of a family. And you can actually define the relationships that each member of that household has. So certainly thinking of parents and youth, but also maybe other adults that are in the household, grandparents, aunts and uncles. It's important that whatever your system you're using, you have the capability to define those relationships and really track who are youth members, who are adults, and then again be able to track really that family as a whole and any of these long-term outcomes that they're achieving. I think we can go ahead and move to the next slide, Dion, unless you have anything you want to add, Scott.
I don't. Yeah, go ahead.
You're fine. Okay. Additionally, I think the other aspect of ETO that we utilize that's also quite interesting is measuring family outcomes through surveys. So this screenshot here is an example of an assessment or survey that we provide to our families. This is actually similar to a survey that was utilized in the Great Families 2020 program, again, that both Edna Martin Christian Center and the Martin Luther King Community Center were part of. But this gets at the ability to track family perceptions over time. So when a family is first enrolled in a program, they can complete an assessment similar to this. And 6 months, 3 months down the line, the same assessment can be completed, and you can really measure those family perceptions and see, since enrolling in your 2Gen program, how have their attitudes changed around specific metrics or just around specific characteristics related to a family and workforce and educational aspects that contribute to the family well-being. You can go ahead and move to the next slide, Deanna. Thank you. Now moving on to the challenges that we have encountered with 2Gen data collection and report writing. So really this is applicable to many different organizations, but duplicate client records. So ETO is fortunate, I guess, to have the capability to implement check settings, we can call them, that if a potential duplicate participant is entered into a program or maybe anywhere within the organization's data tracking, that the staff member is alerted that this may be a potential duplicate. So if you're using, another potential data software, then those capabilities may be limited. But really doing data quality checks and measuring, accurate family records, or again, are there any duplicates within our system? That's critical because you want to make sure these services and outcomes that you're entering into your ETO system or another data tracking system, you want to make sure that you're entering that into the right client record. So duplicates, for example, are problematic because maybe adult A is grouped into a different family when really they should be grouped into said family with two youth clients and another adult. So if they achieve specific metrics, then potentially those would not be tracked with the accurate family. Additionally, then just thinking about client outcomes in terms of referral services. So this is really speaking to cultivating partnerships, with other organizations, other service providers, related to your organization. So without a proper data sharing agreement, any referral services you provide, it might be very difficult then to really follow that client and see what outcomes did they achieve with that service. Did they make contact with a service provider or counselor, whatever the case may be. So that data sharing agreement is really critical to understand long-term what were the outcomes with this client once you referred them to another organization.
Yeah. And just to add one more kind of challenge around the client and the family records is that you could potentially have an individual that is part of more than one family. And when you record services on that individual, and that child or maybe even an adult could potentially have a different relationship within each of those families. And so when you record an effort on that individual, you want to make sure if you're reporting on the family that the correct relationship and that everything aligns correctly with the family and the participant that you want to report on. So it's really critical to have all of those kind of checks in place in your data collection system.
I think we can move to the next slide, Deanna. Thank you. Additionally, now we'll look at different aspects of data collection and how these can be of value to your organization, but also at a greater level. So I think there's tremendous value in demographic data collection because this allows you the capability to measure outcomes and services across different populations, especially with 2Gen data collection. Again, getting to that siloing and kind of niche aspect of 2Gen data collection, it's very easy to think of low-hanging fruit and what do we need to capture? Let's just make this as quick as possible and complete our reporting requirements. However, thinking big picture and how you can take your data collection to the next level gets to the aspect of demographic data collection. So if you really want to measure, in terms of our organization, in terms of this specific program, how equitable are the services we're providing? Are we reaching maybe just one specific population in our immediate service area? Or are we really having, again, that equitable impact that extends beyond and really elevates our human services work? So I think in terms of report writing, really analyzing beyond maybe that low-hanging fruit and seeing what percentage of services are going toward this demographic group. And there's so many different examples, not only in terms of race, gender, and ethnicity, but also maybe employment status, marital status, looking at household size. There's many different areas you can collect data and then analyze the outcomes and metrics on those specific demographics. Furthermore, just looking at data quality and missing demographic information, that's really critical. Again, if you want to take your data collection to the next level, if you have 90% of unknowns for race, gender, and ethnicity, and you don't really know that information on your clients, then kind of like Maggie was speaking to, as far as telling the story of who you're serving in the community, it's very difficult to do that. And then finally, this last point, optimizing your client intake process across programs. So I think this this is a very valuable aspect to avoid data siloing. When you map out your programs based on outcomes and activities, additionally also take into consideration demographics, and don't build out just specific demographics to specific programs. Really think, okay, across all our programs, let's maybe make a standard set of demographics that are required. That way, those programs or funding requirements that are only at the client level and maybe not looking at 2gen data, if there are any families, for example, that are served in those programs, you can still speak to the services provided across all sorts of funding reports and requirements. And finally, our last point here. So looking at the value of frontline staff and how your data collection can serve them most efficiently, so that they're not spending 90% of their workday working on data collection. In ETO, there are several navigational features known as dashboards, where all participant information, or maybe all information that staff typically use, kind of can be located in one place. For participants, for example, thinking of data collection forms in ETO, these are known as touch points, but maybe thinking of an assessment form, maybe financial assistance, maybe, again, education, workforce. What are the typical data points that individuals or families may need to be recorded for? And how can we improve navigation so staff aren't having to click through multiple screens or tabs, but rather they can have everything all in one central location? Additionally, training is critical to really have adequate data collection. So accommodating different learning styles, whether it be through handouts, recorded webinars, one-on-one sessions where you run through the entire gauntlet or data collection system. That way, if there's any questions that pop up along the way, your frontline staff can feel free to ask those. But really being flexible and meeting your staff at whatever avenue serves them best in terms of that training. Looking at data documentation and mapping. So we at United Way write what are called data dictionaries. And so these include all touchpoint forms. Again, any data collection piece, whether it be a metric, outcome, or demographic, really identify and pinpoint where is that tracked. That way, whether it be weeks or months down the line after training, if staff have a question, maybe if there is a metric that only a handful of families enter or achieve, and they're not necessarily utilizing all the time, they can refer back to these resources and quickly identify, how do we track this specific metric?
Yeah.
And finally, just creating data buy-in from staff. So I think this is really a challenge across many organizations. Like Maggie said, with social work or just nonprofit work in general, I think everyone would agree that these individuals are very passionate about their work and maybe understand the value of the data collection and how it serves the organization in evaluating their programs, measuring long-term, the clients and services we're providing, but it can be a burden when not created efficiently. So I think really addressing your frontline staff, showing them how improvements have been made, maybe taking their feedback into account as much as possible, and really building out your system to serve them, but also serve your clients and capture that information that you need for your programs across the organization.
Yeah. And just to piggyback what Michael just said, and this really applies to any data collection system that you have, this is really the great balancing act, right? Because sometimes configuration decisions in the software don't always align with what's best for the staff and how they work. And so you really have to balance, you know, the workflow for your staff as well as, you know, what makes sense from a configuration standpoint in your system. And, you know, sometimes you have to kind of give and take, you know, because again, it really is a balancing act. But yeah, I mean, this is really great stuff.
Thank you, Michael and Scott. I think I learned a few things myself. I don't think I looked at the presentation as closely for your slides as I might have needed to. At this point, we are happy to answer questions, whether coming from kind of the community organization side or from the more technical side. So I know when we're in kind of presenter mode, we can't necessarily see the chat. But Deanna, if you have any questions that you want to lift up to us that we can try to answer, we're really happy to do that.
Yes, there are a few questions in the chat. One is, how does data quality impact outcome reporting?
Oh, who wants to talk about that?
I can. Well, it's from Denise. It means Denise and her team are going to be emailing us and be like, where's your data? But I also think it's, you know, data quality is that exactly what we've been talking about, right? So if a case manager or a wellness coach meets with someone 4 or 5 times in a month, but, you know, not all of those get entered into ETO, it can be the perception that we're not meeting with families, right? Or that families aren't making progress. So I think the quality is that it gets entered, but also that it gets entered in the right place. And that's how I think United Way and Treadwell have helped us. Like, if you are enrolled in a training program and you completed a training program and you've gotten a better job or a raise because of that, how do all of those get entered in the right place to tell that story? Yeah. Because again, anecdotal data only go so far. And so I think that's, I think we said if it's not an ETO, it doesn't happen. And sometimes if it's on paper, it doesn't really happen from a reporting standpoint. And, you know, I'm grateful that we have chances to produce a report and look and see how it is. And if the column is blank, and then we can look and see what families are missing. And that takes time. I think also it has to be for a coach working with 20, 30, 40 families, you know, that really needs to be put in on a timely basis so that, you know, we can remember who might be missing and who's making progress, and use the data and the spreadsheet and the enrollment form and the demographics as a tool, not always see them as a burden, because then the quality just doesn't reflect the good work that we're doing.
I would add, I agree. I think also the quality of the data is going to reflect in a lot of ways the quality of the training that the staff have gotten. And Michael's last point on that last slide, which, you know, speaks to how well you can translate sort of the importance and urgency of quality data to the frontline staff that may see this as more desk work and stuff to get through rather than an integral and important part of their work that is going to allow Edna Martin or whatever agency they're with to continue that kind of important work over time. And I would also like to just shout out to, with the data quality question, those data dictionaries I have come to treasure, because what it means for me from a non-technical standpoint is I'm pulling a report, and like Allison had mentioned, I'm seeing a lot of empty spaces in one particular column, and I'm wondering what's going on. You know, why am I not seeing more data populating around this particular demographic, or what have you? Maybe it's job placements. I know anecdotally from talking to the coaches that there's been a lot of movement in that area, but I'm not seeing it in the report. So what I would go is to that data dictionary, and that would be a first step for me in kind of trying to figure out this dilemma where I'm I'm guessing there's some data quality issues at the root of this. But if I can take the data dictionary and then look at how our data is being entered for that particular metric, pretty quickly, you're going to see, oh, wait, you know what? The coaches have been putting that information in this spot right here, and that spot is not connected to this report at all. So there's where that missing data is. So yeah, to just wrap it up, I would say that from my perspective, the quality aspect of it is one of the biggest limiting factors. And I think that it really starts with training and bringing the direct service staff kind of to the table so that they understand the importance and feel like they are an important part of all of that, rather than just looking at data as an aside or something they're required to do when they're not directly working with the family.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. And the only other piece I would add, getting to that slide earlier, as far as, equity and true impact, if your data quality is struggling, then I think that greatly limits the ability to track, big picture, how much of an equitable impact are you making as an organization?
Mm-hmm. I agree.
All right, it looks like we have a few other questions. When you say data sharing agreement, would that be different than a release of information, a ROI?
Essentially, yeah, any agreement between you and the partner organization to provide that data and provide those outcomes is what we're getting at with that point.
So, yeah, I think if I understand that correctly, the release of information would be a release between the participant and our organization that would say, it could be even something like a photo release. Any type of a release is giving permission from the participant to Edna Martin, in this example, to share their information in one form or another. And there are a lot of rules around how that can be done. And then the data sharing agreement, in my understanding, is between Edna Martin and a partnering organization. So if we were to refer some of our kids to Big Brothers, Big Sisters, but we did want to be able to understand if the child gets matched with a big brother and how that runs over time, we would need to have a separate document between us and Big Brothers and Big Sisters that outlines how we're going to protect the privacy of the individuals, how that data is going to be shared, what data is going to be shared specifically, how that process is going to work, all of those kind of important questions, so that we make sure that the data is protected and is not released where it shouldn't be.
Educational outcomes come to mind, Maggie, as well. Thinking about your programs and any data sharing agreements with schools, that's critical and required to get any, of that academic related information to the student.
Academic, certainly. And another interesting hurdle for us over the last year was around mental health support and kind of getting into the world of HIPAA. So that was another, just important hurdle for us to make sure that we are doing what we are allowed to do legally. And then by centering the family as well and making sure that they are aware and are in agreement, and that both organizations have access to what they need in order to best serve the client.
And there was a follow-up, I believe, to that same question. So Brittany is saying, so more like an MOU rather than an ROI.
I think so.
I think that's a better way to think about it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Again, a partnership with that external organization. Yeah.
In fact, I think that we may have structured some of our partner agreements where it's an MOU and the data sharing agreement is a part of it, kind of like an exhibit that's part of that larger agreement. And then in some scenarios, it was just, we had just two separate documents. So we had, very general MOU that just talked about the partnership and expectations and roles and responsibilities. But then the data sharing was just very targeted to discussing how that data sharing piece was going to work.
And if there's nothing else with that question, moving on to the next one. This question is for Maggie and Allison. How do you now balance the need for data and perhaps the desire to focus just on helping clients and families?
Have you solved that, Allison? It's a work in progress at Edna Martin. I can say that for sure.
Yeah, I think, you know, we spend about, I would say, half of a staff position on data management and consulting related to that. I mean, it's part of the overall nonprofit industrial complex, right? It's part of doing business, and it is both required for us to track what we do. And I think, like Michael said, for us to tell that story and gain additional funding, but also make the case that we're meeting a need. We don't just get to show up and say the MLK Center does great work. Mm-hmm. We have to have some documentation for that, both for families to recruit them and say this works and we have this opportunity. I mean, marketing is like word of mouth, but then we get to say this is why we do this. And then I think the other part is the part about staff too can't just show up and do their work. It's part of our responsibility to both our funders and our donors and our families. And so it is a balance. I mean, there has to be somebody on the staff who understands that big picture. Mm-hmm. We don't have a lot of middle management folks. And so we've tried to work with people's skills to see who does have an interest, who's good at seeing the big picture. Some people, you know, I mentioned this at the beginning that, you know, different coaches have different skills and different opportunities. And so how can we put people in the right position who want to do it, are willing to do it, and are good at it? Because if we're all going to, and we talk about it from the very minute, you know, you come work here, it is part of the job description and it's part of it, so that we're not all fighting it, that there's some acceptance around that, and encouragement and support around that.
Yeah, I would agree. We do mention the need for data to take an important part of your time as a coach in particular, but we do try to balance that with providing other part-time support staff that can help with sort of like big data projects. If we really are doing trying to do a big cleanup of something where we have a lot of duplicate accounts or something along those lines. We do try to make sure that we have at least some part-time staff that are available to support big data entry projects so that we're not putting that right back on the coaches that are also doing direct service with the families. But we also ask them to try and stay as current as possible. So, you know, Allison mentioned you don't want to be entering something that happened 2 months ago because you're not going to remember a lot of those details, most likely. So we've recently started asking in all of our departments for staff to try to get their data entered within 72 hours of the interaction that they're having. It doesn't happen all the time, but it gives them kind of a goal to shoot for, and it makes it less likely that we'll have to do a big kind of Hail Mary project to clean up something that's been kind of building for a while. Yeah. I hope that answers the question.
All right. So we have another question in the chat. How have you used your data to make continuous quality improvements to your programming?
So I can comment on that first. I think that we're really still learning new opportunities to put our data to work in real time. But with that said, one thing that I think is really helpful with utilizing our data in real time is the ability, like I mentioned earlier, to have kind of a snapshot at any given time of where we're at with our 2Gen program or with any of our other programs. If we know that the coaches or anyone who's doing data entry is pretty up to date, and we are confident that the report is pulling comprehensively from wherever it needs to in order to be giving us a good overall snapshot, then you can sit down and really start to look at some of those things that Michael mentioned. Are we being equitable? Are we reaching the residents where they're at? Is there a segment of the population that is just really not represented in our work? And why is that? Is that something that is something we want to really pursue and try and change? Is that okay? Is that just kind of the status quo? So what was nearly impossible when we had data being captured in a dozen different ways is so much easier now that we have consolidated most of our data into one system, because then we can kind of see things in that comprehensive way without having to sit down at a desk and manually try to pull all those puzzle pieces together to get an understanding of what's going on. So for us, at least at Edna Martin, the choice to try and really consolidate our data into ETO has been a game changer as far as our ability then to feel confident that we really understand where we're at in the moment, and then be able to address any patterns that we see developing that we don't want to encourage, or vice versa.
Well, that looks like all the, well, nope. So Denise had mentioned back to the data sharing, that data sharing has many legal implications. If you are sharing client data, it should be beyond a typical MOU. Mm-hmm. And then I have another comment from Brittany. It could be helpful to help frontline staff understand that through the data collected, they can better meet the needs of the family, because they have the numbers backing them to get grant funding, expand the program, etc. I have also noticed that approaching the collaborative documentation conversation from the perspective of empowering the client to be more integrated and knowledgeable about their services and what is going on with their care helps with staff buy-in.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to also reinforce what Denise said. And so sometimes, we have some summer program partners, for example, who we have an MOU with them, and the data we share is the number of students, age, race, maybe income level. But then there are other data sharing agreement. Then there's more formal data sharing agreements, like Denise mentioned, that have legal consequences when it comes to getting data from the school. So, if IPS is providing us with data that includes a child's name and their grade card, or their DIBEL score, or their iRead score, that is specifically identifiable, that is a very different agreement. We don't provide any services that require a HIPAA agreement. But one example is the mental health, counselors that we contract with to provide data. We end up getting, we have referral agreements, and we get, yes, they attended, but there's not any confidential information around treatment plans and things like that. So each MOU and each data sharing agreement would be different and specific based on the kind of data and confidential identifying data. Addresses are an example. Even if we want to, an example would be, we've taken the attendance from the school and plotted it on a map to see where every student lives. That took multiple conversations and an agreement with IPS and their data department on who had access to the addresses. Are we going to de-identify that information to a block group? There's a lot of different things that need to go into those conversations. So I don't want people to think we're just, a parent says, sure, you can release my information, and we tell the world where everybody lives.
Right.
So I have two comments from Whitney I want to make sure that everyone knows about. One is, for those playing the event game, the code for attending this round of breakouts is 2001. And then also she says, thanks for attending and participating this session. Reminder, tune in for our Lunch and Learn session at 12:15. Find the live stream in the agenda.
Great. Thank you, everybody. I think that wraps us up. But yeah, thanks for attending, and hopefully this was helpful. And certainly get in touch if you have any further questions. I think we're all happy to be a resource moving forward. So.
Great job, Maggie. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.